Okay, thank you very much. So yes, I am a feminist, hi. And today I'm going to talk to you a bit about my activism and also just a little bit about gender equality in general. So I'm going to start off with banknotes, which is a campaign that I started and ran between April and July this year. And I'm just going to tell you a little bit about how that came about, how that campaign started. So basically I woke up on the 26th of April this year, and that's what banknotes looked like. And, well, you know, I didn't really think about them, to be honest. I'd never really given much thought to banknotes. I used them to buy food and whatever else I needed. Never really thought about it in much detail. But on the 26th, I woke up to articles like this, saying that the new new £5 note was coming out, and Winston Churchill was going to be the face of the new £5 note. And I guess for most people, they would see that and think, well, it's a relatively minor story, you know, regularly tops Greatest Britain polls, wartime leader, Bank of England's a pretty establishment institution, quite conservative. It's pretty unsurprising and unoriginal choice, frankly. So why would you really think about that? Why did I think about that? Well, I did think about it a lot. The choice niggled at me, and it niggled at me all day. And this was despite the fact that I was meant to actually be writing some coursework for my master's, and really didn't have time to be thinking about feminist campaigns. And I did think for a long time, I really don't have time to start this up. And in fact, I approached a friend and asked her if she would do it for me. And she didn't get back to me within 10 minutes, so I started the campaign myself. But anyway, so why Churchill? I mean, do I have a deep-seated resentment against Churchill? Was it men? Do I hate men? I mean, I am a feminist. I probably do hate men. Well, it's yes and no. Not the hate men part. I don't hate men, generally. But it was more, actually, that the choice of the new £5 note was going to change the note from this, that's Elizabeth Fry, for those of you who don't know, to this. And that meant that the banknotes that were in my wallet, were I to have a wallet that had lots of money in it, which I don't, but if I did, we're going to go from this to this. And for the less quick amongst you, that means that we were going to go from having one woman out of six, one person out of six is going to be a woman in the historical figures, and actually now it was going to go down to 0. And for me, I just felt that that was unacceptable, really. I mean, we're living in the 21st century, women contribute, they've been contributing for a long time, they've done a lot of stuff, there are a lot of great women to choose from, and I just felt it was a completely unnecessary decision, and the Bank of England shouldn't have taken it. So that's kind of what led me to thinking about getting angry about this issue. But why banknotes in particular? As I said, I was doing an MSc at the time, I had other things to be worrying about, I had exams coming up. And I guess, you know, you look at banknotes and you're like, okay, yeah, that's a really rubbish decision, they shouldn't have done it, but is it really the biggest, most important issue in the world? Don't we have other things to be worrying about? And there are a lot of other things to be worrying about if you're a feminist, or if you're just someone who is a good person, which is what a feminist is, so there you go. So I'm just going to take you on a whistle-stop tour of gender equality around the world, but probably mainly in the UK, because that's where I know most about. So we'll start off with this, which is, as you can probably imagine, the pay gap. So all the women in this room, women, be aware of yourselves. If you're in paid employment, no, you're not. You're in unpaid employment. And you've been in unpaid employment since the 7th of November. And that's despite the fact that in this country we have had it's been illegal to pay men more than women for over 40 years. So it's been 40 years this has been illegal, and it's still going on to the extent that women are not paid past the 7th of November. So think about that, guys, and buy us some things. Okay, in a feminist way. Next one, poverty has a woman's face. 70% of the 2 billion people who live in poverty around the world are women. 70%. We make up 52% of the population. That's a pretty large leap. And of course, that figure is deeply connected to the fact that of the people in the world who are illiterate, 2/3 of them are women. And I'm sure most of you have heard of Malala. She stood up for education and was shot in the head for her trouble by the Taliban. And that is obviously not what women in the UK are facing, but it is the kind of anti-women attitude and anti-women getting educated attitude that women are facing around the world today. What other things are women facing? Well, the World Health Organization has stood up about violence against women, and it has declared it a global health problem of epidemic proportions. And it's not really any surprising that they're using such dramatic language, because actually the stats are incredibly shocking. 1 out of 3 women globally will experience violence against women. 1 out of 4 women will be sexually assaulted. It takes a woman an average of 35 incidents of domestic violence to report it to the police. And yet the police record a domestic incidents phone call every single minute, and that's just in the UK. Women make up 89% of those who experience 4 instances or more of domestic violence, and 2 women die every single week from domestic violence in the UK alone, making domestic violence the #1 cause of violent deaths for women. And then when you move on to representation, you would also think, well, really, are banknotes the most important pressing issue? When you look at Parliament, there are fewer than 1 in 4 MPs are a woman. Out of 110 High Court judges, only 17 are women. In the history curriculum, the national history curriculum, in Key Stage 2, there are no women at all. Women are not considered interesting enough to be in the Key Stage 2 curriculum. And in Key Stage 3, there are only 4 women, and they're all lumped together under the changing role of women, rather than under their respective fields, as men are privileged enough to be. When you look at the media, only 1 national newspaper editor is a woman, and that's actually regressed. That's gone down from a really exciting high of 17%, which was the most we've ever had, and that was a few years ago. So that just sort of shows how, even when we think things are getting better, there's always a chance they could get worse. Front pages, we're not on front pages either. Well, that's not strictly true, actually. When there are stories like that one, we do make the front pages when there are pretty women that we can sort of say, oh, aren't they pretty? This is basically an excuse for publications like The Times to do the Sun newspaper. But anyway, yeah, so we form 80% of those pictures, or any picture that is just what's called in the industry a lift, and that's a picture that's not relevant to the story of an article. But when it comes to the actual content of the leading stories, 84% of those stories are about a man, and they are 70% likely to be written by a man as well. So why does any of this matter, though? I mean, when I read those stats about women dying, women being abused, women being sexually assaulted, why does it matter that we don't have women in Parliament, we don't have women in the justice system, we don't have women in the media? Well, it matters for a variety of reasons. Violence against women is the front line of feminism. There's no denying that. It's where the fallout of all the injustices that face women are faced. It's where we staunch the blood. It's where we treat all the symptoms. There's a problem that we face in violence against women, and that is that we are hampered, women are hampered, by being bottom of the political rung. Again and again, we get, when we have foreign policy discussions with various countries, women's rights are always the ones that get sort of, oh, well, we can probably compromise on them. And in this country in particular, we're facing a massive, massive scale of cuts on women's services. They've faced 30% cuts since 2010, and there are more to come, and in fact, there were just more announced on top of the ones that are to come last week. And that actually gets much worse for black and minority ethnic women, where the cuts have gone to 47%. And as any women's service worker could tell you, this is the absolute worst time to make cuts in women's services, because every time there's a recession, violence against women goes through the roof. And we're seeing that now in, for example, last year, 180 women every single day got turned away from refuges because they just simply didn't have enough room. So these vulnerable women were having to go back to abusive partners and stay in situations that were deeply unsafe. And prosecutions have also gone down 13%. So why is this happening? Well, it's happening because of the priorities of a male-dominated parliament and a male-dominated media. And don't be fooled by the way they cleverly put all the women in the front row there. There really aren't that many of them. There's no denying that politics is incredibly responsive to the media. And if you have a media that isn't representing the full diversity of the population, you're going to have a politics that doesn't represent them either. And it's not particularly because the politicians are evil, although in some ways they are, but it's because they tend to listen to who shouts the loudest. They're very, very focused on polls, they're focused on who's going to get them votes, and they know what issues the media are going to write about and get them looking unpopular, looking stupid. And women's issues just isn't really one of them. So they can get away with more than they could in certain other areas, like, for example, tax evasion. Right, so moving on. That's one reason, the idea that we're not really being represented. The other reason is that violence against women is absolutely crucial because it's dealing with women who are suffering right now from all the injustices and who desperately need our help. However, what we ideally want is for those women not to exist at all. We need to not need all these women's services. And in order to do that, we need to not just treat the symptoms, we also need to treat the cause. And the cause of all the injustices that women face in the 21st century is that we're still chronically undervalued. Our stories are not deemed important enough to make the national media or even the local media. Our stories are not deemed important enough to be included in the national curriculum. We're underpaid and underpromoted. We're beaten and sexually violated in a manner that constitutes, let me remind you again, a global health problem of epidemic proportions. Now, I don't want you guys to feel too bad, because it's not just men who undervalue women, it's women as well, and I'll get to this gentleman in a second. We undervalue ourselves all the time. I set up an organization called the Women's Room, which campaigns for greater representation of expertise, female expertise in the media. At the moment, the average is for 5 experts, only 1 will be a woman, which again doesn't represent either, the number of women that live in the country, nor the number of what you might, you might quibble over what an expert is, but there's certainly more than 1 in 5 being a woman. And the catalyst for setting up the Women's Room was 2 days in a row the BBC Radio 4 Today programme ran a segment on women's bodies. And both of those days, 2 days in a row this is, they had an all-male panel discussing women's bodies, which I'd hope most of you would agree is a little bit Victorian and a little bit gross. Anyway, this was one of the guys. He's Antony Selden. He is the headmaster of Wellington College, and in case you were wondering, no, he isn't a noted expert on female teenage girls and their contraception. But anyway, he was invited on to talk about that, and that really was the last straw for me, so I set up the Women's Room, and it is having an impact. We can see that there are more women being included in these discussions, and for a start, people are aware of it even as an issue, which is always the first step. We have over 3,000 women signed up as experts. Women, please sign yourselves up, thewomensroom.org.uk. But we still have this problem of women thinking that their voices don't deserve to be heard. And I just want you to have a look at this, which was, we held a Twitter discussion about women and expertise. And this was a woman who tweeted us who said that she hadn't signed up to a database, and this was why. I have a PhD in clinical psychology and 10 years postdoc experience, but I wouldn't consider myself an expert. Well, frankly, if she doesn't consider herself an expert, no one is an expert. And I just sort of want to, again, compare that with this. And I think you'll agree we have a bit of a problem. The problem is that women don't feel confident enough. And if women don't feel confident enough to speak up, to stand for Parliament, to consider themselves experts when they have 10 years postdoc experience, and to think that they have opinions worth listening to, how are we ever going to get to a stage where we have a media and a government that actually represents us and actually is working for us and trying to help us? Well, the answer is blindingly simple, is that we need to address women's lack of self-confidence. And there's a very simple way of doing that, which is shown in a growing body of role model research. And what the role model research suggests, as the name probably implies, is that women need role models. And this is a picture of Emmeline Pankhurst made up of faces of loads of really incredible, amazing women. And I just really wish the Bank of England had looked at that before making their decision, because I probably wouldn't have had to campaign for 3 months. Anyway, I just want to give you some brief examples of role model research that I find quite compelling, and hopefully you will too. So, for example, maths tests. Women are judged generally to be pretty bad at maths. In fact, I can't remember who it was. I think it was someone at Harvard a while ago said that women were sort of genetically bad at maths. But anyway, they did a couple of tests. And the first test was to show something called stereotype threat, which is where women perform worse when they are made aware of the fact that their gender plays a role in this particular thing, and they're judged to perform worse. So they gave these people these maths tests, and they reminded women that, or they implied to women that there was going to be a gender component to the test and it made a difference, and the women did really, really badly on those tests compared to the tests where they didn't remind them of their gender. But another one, which is slightly more positive, is that they gave 3 groups of people a maths test, and each time they varied the person who gave the maths test. So they gave, they were mixed groups, men and women. And the first test was given by a man. The second test was given by a woman who was presented as really, really rubbish at maths. And the third test was presented by a woman who was presented as really good at maths, very competent at it. And the first 2 tests, the women did pretty badly. The second test, they did appallingly. In the third test, they actually outperformed the men in the group. So just showing there that just having a woman there who makes you think, oh, I can do this too, suddenly women's performance increases dramatically. The second arena is in the political arena. Having a female candidate for office has been shown to increase female voter turnout, massively increase volunteerism. And also in one particular US study, just having one female candidate for Senate increased the chances of a woman being able to name just a single senator by 30%, again taking them over the figure for men. And finally, there was a test, the latest one that I've heard of is of women's ability to give speeches. And basically what they did was that they showed women pictures of, I think it was Angela Merkel and Hillary Clinton before they gave their speeches. And the women gave longer speeches, and they were judged both by themselves and the audience to have given better speeches. So I'll leave it to you to decide whether I actually spent my time in the green room looking at Germaine Greer. But anyway, role models matter. And to take you back again to the original question, why banknotes? And the answer after all this is there's no particular reason, to be perfectly honest. I'd never really thought about banknotes before. I never thought I would think about banknotes. But I saw this story. I had all these studies in my head. I knew about role models mattering. I knew about the injustices women face. And I just thought, this is bullshit, and I'm not taking it. And I'm going to say no. And not only going to say no, I'm going to force them to change their mind. And I'm going to start a debate about why this kind of thing matters. Because I saw banknotes really as a symbol of all the other issues that women face in representation and the way representation impacts on women's abilities to do whatever they want, basically. So as some of you may know, I won that fight, and there I am at, thank you. That's at the Jane Austen House Museum in Chawton. And that is a picture of the new £10 note that will be coming out that has Jane Austen on it in 2017. And obviously that was really exciting. But while I suppose the Jane Austen banknote is the most visually exciting part of it, what I particularly liked was the fact that the Bank of England agreed that their selection procedure was discriminatory, and they've agreed to start a review into that, and the review is being done with the aim of ensuring that banknotes represent the diversity of society. So actually this is a win not just for women, but for everyone, apart from white men. Sorry about that. But you're all right, really. You're kind of okay. Anyway, so that was incredibly exciting, and I suppose that takes me back to the whole idea of symptoms and causes. I suppose you'd call Churchill the symptom, and you'd call the process the cause. And what I managed to do with this campaign, which makes me incredibly happy, is that I address the symptom and the cause. And I guess, well, unless something awful happens, at which point I'll cry, this is never going to have to need to be fought again, because we're changing the process by which it was done. And that's really something that I think is really important for feminism to address, that we need to not just look at all the fallout, we need to look at why the fallout is happening and try and change that. Anyway, some of you, well, probably a few more of you will probably know that this, I guess you'd call it rather minor feminist victory in many ways, had a quite unpleasant coda. And I'm just gonna try and give you a little bit of a taste of what happened to me in the three or so weeks after, starting the day after the banknotes victory was announced. That's not actually my address. They thought it was. Yeah, I don't know how you felt seeing that. I can tell you that when it was coming into my phone at the rate of about 1 threat a minute, it was pretty hideous. I felt pretty sick. I felt pretty scared. I felt pretty alone. And just, I felt really horrified, really. And I guess I'm still dealing with the fallout of it now, actually. At the time, it really affected my ability to sleep, my ability to eat, my ability to work. I couldn't work. I had to defer my master's. I couldn't do my dissertation. And it was a pretty horrifying time. And, you know, as you can see, they were trying to find out where I lived. And the police told me I should expect them to find that. So I sort of lived this perpetual worry that these men who were saying they were going to mutilate my genitals and shove poles up my vagina and shove their dicks down my throat were actually going to find me and try and do this stuff to me. And I just lived on a mixture of adrenaline and fear for about 3 months. But I suppose in some ways that coda has more of a message than just that I was terrified. And actually, the message is that, for me, it made me realize that the banknotes campaign was perhaps more important than I thought it was when I started. And I always knew that it was important for women to have role models. I knew that the fact that there weren't that many women in public life meant that the women who stood up were more likely to get attacked. But I suppose I hadn't expected that level of vitriol over such a seemingly small thing as a woman on a banknote. And it was really that juxtaposition that just made me think, this is incredibly important. We have to keep fighting for female representation. Because what those men said to me, other than the fact that they were misogynistic dickheads, was that these men were scared. They were scared of me. And that was why they sent me these threats, because they were worried about what I represented. And what I represented was taking from them what they thought was rightfully theirs, and that was a place in the public sphere. And that's more than anything, and you know, that's another reason why we have to keep fighting, partly because it is unacceptable that when a woman stands up and points out an injustice, men will rush to try and shut her up with threats of rape. But also, we don't want to give them the satisfaction. We don't want to give these assholes the satisfaction of shutting us up, putting us back in our place, sending us back to the kitchen, and having us make them a sandwich. That is not going to happen. Women are here. We're here to stay. We're coming to all the professions. We're going to be 50% of government. And when that happens, as I hope it will in my lifetime, I am going to laugh long and hard, because it will show these men that they can threaten to rape us all they like. They're not going to win. Thank you.